The knock at my door was softer than usual, almost hesitant. I had just finished folding a basket of tiny socks and shirts, my grandkids' clothes. For the past 6 months, my days had been filled with babysitting them while my son and his wife worked. The children were a joy, full of laughter and little questions. They gave me purpose. After my retirement, I expected it was my son Daniel, stopping by to pick them up or maybe drop something off. But when I opened the door, he wasn't there. Instead, a plain white envelope had been slipped under the mat. My name was scrawled across it in bold letters. Mom. Something inside me tightened. Daniel never wrote me letters. I picked it up, sat down at my kitchen table, and slowly tore it open. Inside was a printed document, neat and professional, the kind you'd expect from a lawyer or accountant. My hands trembled as I read the heading, Household Expense Reimbursement. My eyes darted over the lines, and the numbers began to blur. There, bold as day, was the accusation. Electricity usage from babysitting hours, $1,342.17. The words slammed into me like a punch to the chest. I blinked, reread, and shook my head. It had to be a joke, a cruel prank. I had babysat his children for free out of love, out of sacrifice while he and his wife chased their careers. I had never asked for a dime, not for food, not for gas, not for anything. And now my own son had sent me a bill. The letter continued, since you've been keeping the kids during weekdays, the cost of electricity, food, and utilities has increased significantly. We think it's only fair that you contribute your share. Please arrange payment by the end of the month. It was signed in Daniel's handwriting, not typed, not detached. He had written it himself. I dropped the paper on the table, as though it burned. My heart raced, my throat felt dry. I stood, pacing the kitchen, replaying every sacrifice I had made in the last half year. Early mornings making their breakfasts, late nights rocking the baby back to sleep, countless hours at the park, at the doctor's office, reading bedtime stories. I had poured myself into those children, believing I was giving Daniel the freedom to build a stable life for them. And this was how he repaid me, with a bill. The kitchen walls seemed to close in. I pressed my palms flat against the counter, fighting the sting in my eyes. This wasn't just about money. This was betrayal, cold and calculated, from my own flesh and blood. That night, I barely slept. The paper sat on my nightstand like a snake coiled and ready to strike. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bold print $1,34,200 The number etched itself into my mind, heavy and unforgiving. By morning, I resolved to confront Daniel. The following day, I invited him over. I set the letter in the middle of the table where he couldn't avoid it. When he arrived, he seemed cheerful, casual, as though nothing was wrong. He kissed me on the cheek and poured himself some coffee. Daniel, I began, my voice tight. What is this? He glanced at the paper and shrugged. Oh, just the breakdown of costs. You know, since you've been using the electricity and feeding the kids here. The casual tone sliced through me. He said it as though it were perfectly reasonable, as though I were a tenant overstaying my welcome rather than his mother. I clenched my fists under the table. I babysit your children for free. I never asked you for money, and now you're charging me for electricity. Do you hear how absurd that is? Daniel's eyes hardened, and for the first time, I saw something cold flicker in them. Mom, it's not absurd, it's practical. My wife and I discussed it. We're struggling financially, and we can't keep covering all the extra costs. You need to do your part. My part. The words stung deeper than any insult. Had he forgotten the years I spent raising him, the sacrifices I made as a single mother after his father died? Had he erased all those nights I worked double shifts just to put food on the table? I am doing my part, I snapped, my voice breaking. I am giving my time, my energy, my love. I am caring for your children every single day so you and your wife don't have to pay for daycare. Do you know how much that would cost you? He looked away, uncomfortable, but not remorseful. That's different. You're their grandmother. You should want to do it. But the bills, the bills. I rose from my chair, shaking with fury. You think you can put a price tag on love, on family, on everything I've done for you? Daniel sighed, as though I were the unreasonable one. Mom, it's just money. Don't make it bigger than it is. Pay the bill, and we'll move on. The audacity left me breathless. I stared at him, searching for the boy I once knew, the child who used to cling to my hand, who once cried when I left for work. All I saw was a man I barely recognized, a stranger in my son's face. Finally, I whispered, "Get out." He froze. What? Get out of my house? Now. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He gathered his things, muttered something under his breath, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that followed was heavier than any scream. That night, I sat alone with my thoughts, the house unbearably quiet. Doubt gnawed at me. Was I wrong? Was I overreacting? The voice in my head tried to rationalize. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe it was his wife's idea. Maybe he didn't mean it. But the letter sat there on the table, undeniable proof of his intent. He had put his betrayal into words, into numbers. He had made it real. As I stared at it, a new feeling stirred beneath the pain. Not just hurt, not just anger, resolve. If Daniel wanted to treat me like a burden, like a line item on his budget, then he had forgotten who I was. I had raised him with strength. I had survived worse storms than this, and I would not let my own son reduce me to a bill to be paid. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. That piece of paper was the first crack in the foundation of our family, and soon, everything we thought was secure would come crashing down, because when betrayal enters a family, it never comes alone. The morning after Daniel stormed out of my house, the phone calls began. At first, I ignored them. My heart was still raw, my hands trembling every time I glanced at the letter still lying on my kitchen table. I could not bring myself to throw it away. It felt like evidence of a crime, proof that my son had crossed a line no child should ever cross. But by the third call, I answered. It was my daughter-in-law, Melissa. Her voice was clipped, sharp. "We need to talk." I swallowed hard. There is nothing left to talk about. I saw the bill. I spoke to Daniel. "You both made yourselves very clear." There was a pause, then her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "You should have just paid it. Now you've made things worse." I stiffened. Worse? What could possibly be worse than my own son treating me like a tenant in my own home? Melissa's laugh was cold, humorless. "You really think you've been doing us a favor? Babysitting, feeding them, you've been using us. We've been carrying you. Daniel may not see it yet, but I do. You are draining us, and I will not let it continue." Her words struck me like knives. "Draining you? I have given you everything. I have cared for your children as though they were my own, and you dare say I am draining you?" Melissa's tone turned smug. "You think you're indispensable. You're not. Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." Before I could reply, she hung up. I sat in silence, the phone heavy in my hand. My pulse raced. Something darker was brewing here, something far beyond a bill for electricity. Melissa's words echoed in my head. "Keep pushing, and you'll regret it." That evening, I received another envelope. This one wasn't from Daniel, but it bore his handwriting again. Inside was a typed document, longer this time. At the top, in bold, it read, "Notice of Formal Agreement." My stomach dropped as I skimmed the pages. It was a drafted contract. They wanted me to sign a legal agreement that if I continued watching the children, I would pay for half of the utility costs in the household. Not only that, but they included clauses about expectations, consequences, and non-compliance. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was terrifying. I felt my knees weaken as I dropped the papers onto the floor. This wasn't just Melissa's voice whispering into Daniel's ear. This was Melissa, tightening a rope around my neck, slowly pulling, testing how far I would bend before I broke. I wanted to call Daniel immediately, to scream, to demand an explanation, but something stopped me. A small, quiet voice inside whispered, "Wait, watch. Do not reveal your hand too soon." The following week, I noticed small changes in Daniel's behavior. When he dropped off the children, his hugs were stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. Melissa rarely came inside anymore. When she did, she moved through my house as though she were inspecting it, her eyes lingering on the furniture, the photos, the walls. One afternoon, I overheard them in my driveway. My window was open just enough to catch their words. "Melissa, she's stubborn. She won't sign easily, Daniel. She will. She has to. What choice does she have? Melissa, if she refuses, we'll push harder. We'll make her look unstable. Then she have no say in anything." The words froze my blood. Unstable? Were they planning to frame me? To strip me not only of dignity but of credibility? I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding so loud I feared they would hear it. I pressed a hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. My son, my Daniel, was conspiring with his wife to paint me as unfit, to corner me into submission. That night, I sat at my desk and pulled out an old notebook. For the first time, I began documenting everything: the bill, the contract, the overheard conversation, the phone call with Melissa. Dates, times, exact words. I wrote it all down with trembling hands but steady determination. If they wanted a battle, I would not enter it unarmed. The next blow came sooner than I expected. On Friday, when I arrived at Daniel's house to pick up the kids, Melissa met me at the door. She did not invite me in. Instead, she stepped outside and pulled the door shut behind her. "You won't be watching them today," she said coldly. I frowned. "Why not? Daniel asked me yesterday to keep them while you both worked." Melissa folded her arms. "Plans change. From now on, you will not see them unless you sign the agreement. No exceptions." My chest tightened. "You would use my grandchildren as leverage." Her lips curled into a thin smile. "Call it what you want. We call it protecting ourselves." I searched her face, desperate to see even a flicker of compassion. But there was nothing, only calculation. When I returned home, the silence of the empty house swallowed me whole. The toys that usually littered my living room sat untouched. The laughter that had filled the air was gone. The absence was louder than any sound. I sat on the couch and wept, not just for myself, but for those children. They were pawns in a cruel game they could not understand. Days turned into weeks. Daniel called less and less. When he did, his words were curt, rehearsed, as though Melissa stood behind him feeding lines. My heart ached for the children, for the warmth they brought into my life. But I would not yield. I would not sign away my dignity. Then, one evening, the phone rang again. This time, the voice was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Thompson?" a woman asked. "Yes, this is Clara, from Child Protective Services. We received a call regarding your home environment and your ability to provide safe care for children." My knees buckled, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "What? Who would say such a thing?" The woman's voice was professional but firm. "We cannot disclose the source of the report, but we are required to investigate. We will need to schedule a home visit this week." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Melissa. I knew it with absolute certainty. She was making good on her threat. As I hung up the phone, my hands shook with both fear and fury. She wanted to destroy me. She wanted to cut me off from my grandchildren, to paint me as dangerous, unstable, unfit, and worst of all, she had convinced Daniel to stand by her side. But she had underestimated me. I looked at the notebook on my desk, filled with my careful records. I touched the letter, the contract, the notes of their whispered threats. She thought she was weaving a trap, but I was watching every move, documenting every lie, preparing for the day her web would collapse on her head. Because if there was one thing Melissa had forgotten, it was that I had raised a son alone through hardship, loss, and sacrifice. I had survived storms she could never imagine, and I would survive this one too. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the tears from my face, and whispered into the empty house. "You picked the wrong woman to corner." The battle had only begun. Asterisk. I stood in my kitchen the morning after that bill was handed to me, staring at the familiar wooden cabinets that had been mine for decades. Every dent, every scratch on those doors carried a memory, but now they mocked me. How had a house that once held Sunday roasts, Christmas mornings, and bedtime stories turned into a battleground? The letter lay on the counter, crisp and cruel, demanding that I pay my own son back for the electricity I had used while caring for his children. My chest ached with disbelief. But the disbelief was quickly hardening into something else, something heavier, darker, angrier. I decided I would not stay quiet. That afternoon, I called my son. My voice trembled as the phone rang, but when he answered, I tried to keep myself steady. "David," I said. My tone clipped. "We need to talk." There was silence on the line for a moment. Then he sighed like a teenager being scolded. "Mom, if this is about the bill, we've already gone through this. You used the power. You owed the money." Owed the money. My voice cracked as decades of sacrifice clawed at my throat. "David, I raised you. I gave you a home, food, everything you needed. I worked extra shifts so you could go to college. I stayed up nights when you were sick, prayed for you when you strayed. And now you send me a bill for babysitting my own grandchildren." He scoffed. "It's not about that. It's about principle. Times are tough. Energy costs are through the roof. Everyone has to pitch in." I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but the fury boiled higher. "Pitch in. I gave you my time, my care, my love. You cannot measure that in kilowatts." "David, Mum, you're being dramatic," he muttered, as though I was nothing more than a nuisance. And in that instant, I knew something inside me had snapped. That night, I opened an old box from the attic. Inside were years of journals, photographs, and memories, proof of everything I had done for my family. I flipped through those pages, reliving the sacrifices I had made. Every line of my handwriting told a story of love without conditions, of labor without complaint. Yet here I was, being reduced to a line item on a utility bill. I thought back to when David was little. He had once broken the living room window with a baseball, and I paid for it with my meager paycheck. I never sent him a bill for the glass. When he borrowed my car in college and wrecked the bumper, I covered the repairs without ever asking him to pitch in. When he married Lisa and they couldn't afford their first month's rent, I wrote the check quietly and smiled through the struggle of balancing my own bills. But now, the very boy I raised had turned me into a burden. The rage inside me began to transform into resolve. The next weekend, David and Lisa invited me over for dinner, likely to smooth things over. I went, but I went prepared. Their home was large, filled with the latest gadgets, a gleaming new refrigerator humming in the kitchen, a giant television dominating the living room. As I walked in, I noticed the lights blazing in every room, music playing from wireless speakers, and the hum of multiple devices charging on the counter. The irony was bitter. Lisa greeted me at the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Glad you could make it, Evelyn," she said, her voice sugary. I returned the smile, but mine carried steel beneath it. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. Dinner began quietly. They served steak and wine, the kind of luxury I had long since given up affording for myself. For a while, the children giggled and filled the air with joy, but I noticed how David and Lisa exchanged looks, tight and tense. Finally, as dessert was served, I cleared my throat. "David, Lisa," I began, "I've been thinking about that bill." David shifted uncomfortably. Lisa raised her chin, clearly bracing herself. "I realized something important," I continued, my voice even but sharp. "If we are now keeping track of debts, then I have a very long ledger to present." They froze, forks halfway to their mouths. "What do you mean?" David asked cautiously. I leaned forward, looking him dead in the eyes. "I mean that if you are charging me for electricity used while babysitting your children, then perhaps I should begin charging you for the countless hours I have spent raising you, supporting you, and yes, babysitting for free. Should we calculate the cost of diapers I bought when you were an infant, the countless meals I cooked, the rides to school, the tuition I helped cover, the nights I stayed awake while you cried? Should I send you a bill for every sacrifice I made?" Lisa's face paled. "That's not the same," she whispered. "Isn't it?" I asked sharply. "Because to me, love is given freely. Family is not about keeping score. But since you've chosen to turn family into a transaction, maybe it's time we keep score properly." The room went silent. The children stopped their chatter, sensing the tension. David set down his fork. "Mom, you don't understand. Times are different now. We're trying to teach the kids about responsibility. We thought if you contributed, it would set an example." I laughed bitterly. "An example of what?" "That love comes with an invoice, that caring for family requires a contract. If that is the example you want for your children, then you have failed them more than you realize." Lisa tried to interject, but I raised my hand to silence her. My voice grew stronger, steadier, fueled by decades of unspoken pain. "I have always been there for you, David, always, without question, without cost. And now, in return, you've humiliated me. You've disrespected me. You've taken the bond of family and reduced it to dollars and cents. I will not forget this, and I will not let it slide." The table shook as David pushed back his chair. His face burned red, his fists clenched. "If you don't want to contribute, then maybe you shouldn't come around so often," he snapped. The words pierced me like knives, but they also clarified everything. I rose from my seat, my voice cold and clear. "If that is how you feel, then perhaps I won't. But remember this, David, the choices you make today will echo tomorrow. Someday, when you need me, when the tides of life turn, you will remember this conversation, and you will regret it." With that, I walked out. "And you will regret it." With that, I walked out. The night air hit my face like a slap, but it was cleansing. The anger inside me was no longer a chaotic storm. It had sharpened into purpose. I realized then that this battle was not just about a bill. It was about dignity. It was about boundaries. It was about showing my son and his wife that I was not their servant to be used, discarded, and billed like a utility. From that day forward, I resolved to change everything. I would no longer be the silent, giving mother who endured disrespect with a smile. I would no longer allow myself to be treated as expendable. I had given my family everything, and they had turned on me. But now, I would take back control. Little did they know, the storm they had unleashed inside me was just beginning. When I walked away from that dinner table, my heart was beating like a drum inside my chest. The streets were quiet, but inside me a storm was raging. David's words, "Maybe you shouldn't come around so often," rang louder than any thunder. He was not only dismissing me, he was exiling me from the very family I had helped him build. That night, I could not sleep. The clock ticked, the wind rattled the windows, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My mind ran through decades of memories, every sacrifice, every moment of love, freely given. What had it all been for? Was motherhood nothing more than a service to be billed and forgotten once the debt was paid? The more I thought about it, the more I knew I needed to make David and Lisa understand the weight of what they had done. They needed to see, with their own eyes, what it truly meant to put a price on family. So I began writing. I pulled out a thick notebook and a pen, and I started creating a ledger of sacrifice. Each page listed, in painstaking detail, the things I had done for David over the years. January 3, 1988, paid $350 for emergency room visit after David broke his arm climbing the fence. No reimbursement requested. August 12, 1993, spent one for sleepless nights nursing David through pneumonia. Value of services, if billed as private nurse, $2,100. October 2, 1997. Purchased first car for David to commute to college. Cost $4,200. Loan, never repaid. On and on I went, filling the notebook with decades of sacrifice. Each line carved into me, but it also fueled me. I wanted the weight of those pages to hit David and Lisa, like a thunderclap. When the sun rose, I had barely rested, but my spirit burned with a clarity I had not felt in years. The next day, I visited their home unannounced. Lisa opened the door, surprise flashing across her face. She was still in her robe, a cup of coffee in hand. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "what are you doing here?" "I came to deliver something," I replied, holding the thick notebook in my hand, like a weapon. David appeared behind her, his expression already sour. "Mom, I thought we said you said enough," I cut him off. "And now, it is my turn." I stepped inside, brushing past them, and set the notebook firmly on the dining table. The children peeked from the hallway, curiosity in their eyes. I caught their gaze for a moment and softened. But then I turned back to David, with steel in my voice. "This," I said, tapping the notebook, "is the bill you owe me. Every hour, every dollar, every ounce of my love that you have decided should have a price. If you want to turn family into transactions, then here it is. Every debt tallied, every sacrifice accounted for." David's face paled. Lisa's mouth fell open. "Mom, this is ridiculous," David stammered. "Is it?" I shot back. "Because you thought it was reasonable to hand me a bill for the electricity I used while caring for your children. I gave you my time, my strength, my years, and you repaid me with an invoice, so now I am returning the courtesy." He reached for the notebook, flipping through the pages, his eyes widening as he scanned the entries. Lisa leaned over his shoulder, her hand trembling slightly as she turned the pages. "You cannot be serious," Lisa whispered. "Oh, I am very serious," I said firmly. "You thought you were teaching responsibility. Let me teach you a lesson in responsibility. Family is not about keeping score. But if you insist on keeping score, then understand this ledger will never balance in your favor. You owe me far more than I could ever owe you." David slammed the notebook shut, his jaw tight. "Mom, this is manipulative. You're trying to guilt us." I laughed bitterly. "No, David. I am trying to open your eyes. But if guilt is what you feel, then maybe it is because you know, deep down, that you have wronged me." Lisa placed her hand on David's arm, her voice low and uneasy. "Maybe we went too far. David, maybe sending her that bill wasn't the right thing to do." I saw it then, the crack in their armor. Lisa was faltering, doubt creeping into her tone. David, however, held firm, his pride refusing to bend. "Mom," he said, his voice rising, "you need to stop this. You're making a scene, confusing the kids, dragging up the past. You're the one causing the problem now." I straightened my back, my hands gripping the chair in front of me. "The problem began when you treated me like a stranger in my own family. When you decided that the woman who raised you, who gave you everything, should be billed like an outsider. Do not twist this onto me. The children were staring now wide-eyed, clinging to the hallway wall. I softened my tone and turned to them. Children, listen to me. Love is not about money. When I cared for you, it was never about what I could get back. It was about giving because I wanted to, because that is what family does. Do not let anyone teach you otherwise. Lisa looked at me, her face conflicted, torn between loyalty to her husband and the truth of my words. David, however, was stone. Enough, he snapped. If you cannot respect the way we run our home, then maybe you should stop coming around entirely. We will manage our children on our own. The words struck me again, but this time they did not break me, they hardened me. I gathered the notebook, tucked it back under my arm, and looked him in the eyes. So be it. If you do not want me here, then I will go. But do not think for a second that this is over. One day, you will look back and realize the cost of what you have done. And when that day comes, this ledger will not be just ink on paper. It will be the tally of a broken bond. With that, I turned and left their home. The air outside was sharp, but it filled my lungs like freedom. My hands trembled, not with weakness, but with resolve. For the first time, I felt the full weight of a truth I had been avoiding. My son no longer saw me as a mother, he saw me as a liability. But if that was the case, then I would no longer carry his burdens. The days that followed were strangely quiet. I stopped babysitting the children. I stopped cooking meals to bring to their house. The phone rang less often, and when it did, it was brief and transactional. And yet, I felt lighter. But beneath that lightness, there was still a fire burning, a storm that had not yet passed, because I knew David and Lisa had taken something from me that I could never get back, respect, and I would not rest until they understood what they had lost. The ledger remained on my nightstand, a constant reminder. I would wait, I would watch, and when the moment came, I would strike with the truth they could no longer deny. For now, I had pulled back, but the storm was still gathering, and when it broke, it would shake the very foundation of our family. For weeks, the silence between us stretched like a canyon. No invitations, no calls asking if I could watch the children, no family dinners. I told myself it was better this way, that I had drawn a boundary at last, but the ache inside me betrayed my bravado. The house was too quiet, the evenings dragged on, and I found myself staring at the clock, wondering if the children were asking for me, if they missed my bedtime stories, if they remembered the way I used to tuck them in with a kiss on their foreheads. I busied myself with chores. I polished the silver, reorganized the pantry, tended the garden until my hands were raw. But no matter how I tried, I could not escape the hollowness gnawing at me. Motherhood is not something you can simply switch off. Even when your child turns his back on you, the love remains like an open wound. Then, one evening, the phone rang. My heart leaped before I even checked the caller ID. It was David. I snatched the receiver. David, his voice was strained, rushed. Mom, listen, we need you tonight. The sitter canceled. Can you come over right away? Please. For a moment, I froze. After all the pain, after all the rejection, he wanted me again. Not for love, not for reconciliation, but out of necessity. Part of me wanted to hang up, to let him scramble, to make him feel the weight of what it meant to cut me out. But the thought of my grandchildren tipped the scales. I will be there, I said curtly, and hung up before he could add another word. When I arrived at their house, the children ran to me with open arms. Their laughter filled the air, warming my heart in a way nothing else could. For a few hours, I forgot the bitterness. We played board games, baked cookies, and I read them their favorite story before bed. Their innocence reminded me why I had endured so much for so long. But when David and Lisa returned later that night, everything shattered again. Lisa's smile was tight, her tone perfunctory. Thanks, Evelyn, we appreciate it. She handed me a small envelope, pressing it into my palm. I frowned. What is this? Just something for your time, she said quickly, glancing at David. Confused, I opened the envelope. Inside was $40 in cash. My stomach dropped. You are paying me, I whispered, my voice trembling. David cleared his throat. It is just fair, Mom. We do not want you to feel taken advantage of. If you are babysitting, you should be compensated. If you are babysitting, you should be compensated. I felt the blood rush to my face. Compensated? I am your mother. Those children are my grandchildren. I do not babysit them for money. I spend time with them because I love them. Lisa raised her chin, and we appreciate that, but we also believe people's time has value. You said before that you felt disrespected. This way, it is clear. We respect your time, and we are paying you for it. I stared at them both, my heart hammering. They did not understand at all. They were trying to fix the wound they had opened with the very blade that had cut me. You cannot buy love, I snapped, my voice rising. You cannot reduce family to dollars in an envelope. Do you not see how insulting this is? Do you not see how much you are destroying by treating me like a hired hand? David rubbed his forehead. Mom, please do not make this harder than it is. We are trying to do the right thing. We thought this would help. Help? I laughed bitterly. You call this help? You are stripping away everything sacred about being a family. First, you sent me a bill. Now, you hand me wages like I am some stranger off the street. You are not respecting me, David. You are erasing me. The children appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing their eyes, frightened by the shouting. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to lower my voice. Go back to bed, sweethearts, I said softly. Everything is fine. But nothing was fine. That night, I left their house with the envelope still clutched in my hand. I drove home in silence, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my chest heaving with rage and heartbreak. By the time I reached my driveway, I was shaking. I stormed into my kitchen, slammed the envelope on the table, and tore it open. The bills fluttered across the wood like taunts. That was the breaking point. I sat down and began writing a letter. Not a gentle letter, not a plea, a declaration. I poured every ounce of my fury, my grief, my disappointment onto those pages. I told David and Lisa exactly how they had humiliated me, how they had reduced me to a commodity, how they had shattered the bond between mother and son. I wrote, if family is business to you, then let me be clear. Business can be terminated. You cannot have both my love and my labor, while you treat me as less than a mother. From this day forward, you will no longer receive either. By the time I finished, tears blurred the ink, but I did not stop. I signed my name with a flourish that shook, not from weakness, but from resolve. The next morning, I mailed the letter. For days afterward, silence hung heavy. I waited for a call, for anger, for pleading, for anything. But the phone stayed quiet. I went about my routines. But inside me, something had shifted. I no longer felt like the victim of their cruelty. I felt like a woman reclaiming her dignity. Then, a week later, Lisa appeared at my door. She stood there in the afternoon light, her expression taut, her eyes weary. She held the letter in her hand. Evelyn, she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. We need to talk. I stepped aside, letting her in, my heart pounding. This was it, the confrontation, the reckoning. She sat at my table, unfolding the letter carefully. I read this, and I realized something. You are right. We went too far. I went too far. She hesitated, then looked me in the eye. But David does not see it that way. He thinks you are trying to control us, to shame us. He says if you want to step back, then maybe that is for the best. My breath caught. For the best. For who? For him? For you? What about the children? Do you not see what he is doing to them? He is teaching them that love is a transaction, that relationships are negotiable. That is not family, Lisa. That is business. Her hands trembled on the table. I know, and I do not want them growing up thinking that. But David is stubborn. He will not bend. I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. Then you need to ask yourself, Lisa, what kind of example you want to set for your children. Because one day, they will grow up, and they will remember how you treated me. They will remember whether you chose to honor love or to honor pride. Tears welled in her eyes. For a moment, I thought she might crumble. But then, she straightened her shoulders, tucking the letter back into her purse. I cannot change David, she whispered, but I will think about what you said. And with that, she left. I sat alone in the silence, my pulse still racing. The lines had been drawn, the choices made. David had pushed me out, but in doing so, he had revealed his true colors. I knew then that this battle was not over. The storm was only beginning. And when it broke, it would tear through every lie, every illusion, every fragile bond holding us together, because I had finally reached my breaking point. And once a mother reaches that point, there is no turning back. Asterisk. The night after Lisa came to my door, I sat by the window with the letter she had returned. I held it in my hands like a fragile relic, though the words inside were anything but fragile. They were sharp, uncompromising, and final. The silence of the house pressed down on me. For years, that silence had been a comfort, but now it was a reminder of absence. My grandchildren's laughter no longer filled my rooms. My son's voice no longer echoed on the phone. Yet the silence did not crush me. It sharpened me. I realized then that I was standing at a crossroads. I could either allow David's cruelty to define the remainder of my years, or I could seize control of the story and reclaim my dignity in full. I had already tasted what it felt like to stand my ground. Now I needed to push further. The next morning, I called David. My voice was calm, steady, even cold. "We need to meet," I said. He sighed heavily, as though I were an inconvenience. "What now, Mom?" "Face to face," I replied. "No excuses tonight." There was a long pause, then a muttered, "Fine." I arrived at their house as the sun set, the sky painted in streaks of crimson and gold. The air was thick with tension before I even stepped through the door. Lisa hovered in the kitchen, her face pale. David sat at the table, arms crossed, jaw set. I placed my bag on the chair, pulled out the envelope of cash they had given me, and laid it flat in front of him. "Return to sender," I said. David's lips curled into a smirk. "So this is what tonight is about." "No," I answered firmly. "Tonight is about the truth, and about choice." I reached into my bag again and pulled out the thick ledger I had created. I placed it beside the envelope, letting the weight of it land with a thud. "This," I said, my voice strong, "is the record of every sacrifice I made for you, every bill I paid, every hour I worked, every tear I shed. If you want to treat family like business, then business is what you will get. And according to this ledger, you will never repay me in 1,000 lifetimes." David rolled his eyes. "This is absurd." Lisa shifted uncomfortably. Her eyes darted between us, torn. I leaned forward. "I am giving you a choice, David. You can throw away this ledger and admit that family is not measured in dollars. Or you can continue down this path and lose me forever. There is no middle ground." The silence stretched heavy. David drummed his fingers on the table, his pride battling with reason. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, you are making everything dramatic. Nobody said you are not family. We just wanted things to be fair." I snapped. "Fair is love given without expectation. Fair is sacrifice made willingly, not weaponized later. You speak of fairness, but what you want is control. You want to redefine family into something that suits your convenience. I will not allow it." Lisa finally spoke, her voice trembling. "David, she is right. We have gone too far." His face darkened. "Stay out of this, Lisa." "No," she said, her tone firmer now. "I am tired of pretending. She is right. We treated her like an outsider, and the children are watching. They are learning from this." I looked at her, surprised by her courage. For the first time, I saw not just a daughter-in-law, but a mother struggling to protect her children from a legacy of coldness. David slammed his fist on the table. "Enough. If you want to take her side, then go ahead, but do not expect me to bow down." My heart tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "Then, I will make the decision for you, David. From this day forward, I will no longer be a part of your household. You will not send me bills, and you will not hand me wages. But do not call on me when it is convenient. I will not be your safety net, your babysitter, or your silent servant. I will not be anything to you at all." His eyes widened, shock flickering for the first time. "You cannot mean that." "I do," I said with finality, "because I refuse to spend the rest of my life being humiliated. I raised you with love, and you repaid me with invoices. That is not a son, that is a stranger wearing my child's face." Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. David stood, fists clenched, his face twisted with rage. "If that is how you feel, then leave. Walk away. But do not come crawling back when you realize you have no one." The words hit me like knives, but they did not kill me. They forged me. I stood slowly, gathering the envelope and ledger back into my bag. I looked at Lisa then, at my grandchildren peeking from the hallway, their little faces pale with confusion. I bent down, kissed them both on their foreheads, and whispered, "Remember, love is not money. Love is giving without taking. Do not forget." Then I straightened, turned to David, and said the words that would change everything. "You have lost me." The silence that followed was deafening. I walked out, the night air wrapping around me like armor. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from release. For the first time, I had taken my power back. Release. For the first time, I had taken my power back. The days that followed were different. My phone no longer rang with demands. The quiet that had once cut me now felt like a blessing. I cooked meals for myself. I read books without interruption. I even joined a local community group that welcomed me warmly. Slowly, I began to rediscover who I was beyond being a mother, beyond being a grandmother, beyond being a utility to be used. But even as I carved a new life, I knew the storm had not passed. David's pride was too great, his temper too fierce. He would not let my decisions stand without consequence. And I was right. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from David. My hands trembled as I opened it, but not from fear, from anticipation. The words inside were short, sharp, and venomous. If you no longer wish to be a part of our family, then consider this official. Do not contact us again. Do not interfere in our lives. We will raise our children without you. My vision blurred as I read, my heart pounding. This was not just rejection. This was exile. Yet, instead of crumbling, I felt an unfamiliar calm wash over me. His words were meant to wound, but they only confirmed what I already knew. My son had chosen pride over love. I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the ledger, and closed the cover. To me, it was not an ending. It was evidence, proof of the choice he had made. But deep inside, I also knew something else. The story was not finished, because children grow, children see, and no matter what David told them, no matter how he tried to twist the truth, one day my grandchildren would understand. One day, they would see the difference between love and transaction, between sacrifice and selfishness. And when that day came, they would know who I truly was. Until then, I would wait. But waiting did not mean weakness. It meant preparing, because this war between mother and son was far from over, and the next battle would decide everything. The letter from David had been sharp enough to cut through my chest, but I refused to bleed in silence. I folded it, placed it in my ledger of truths, and locked it away in the cabinet. That night, I did not cry. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the steam as if it carried answers. My son had declared war on me, severing the bond between mother and child with a single page of ink. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I had not felt in years. It was as if a veil had lifted. I could see my life laid bare, each choice I had made, each sacrifice, each humiliation, and I understood, finally, that his words could not erase me. They could not erase the decades I had carried him, fed him, clothed him, and lifted him when he fell. He wanted me erased from his present, but he could never erase me from his past. That knowledge gave me strength. Days passed, then weeks. My phone remained silent, yet I caught whispers in the town. A neighbor mentioned seeing Lisa at the grocery store, her face tired, her voice sharp with the children. Another woman from church said she had overheard David complaining loudly at the bank, blaming family problems for his short temper. Slowly, the pieces came together. My son's pride had not healed him. It had started to rot him from within. Then, one afternoon, as I returned from a meeting at the community center, I found someone waiting on my porch. It was Lisa. Her hair was tied back, her eyes rimmed with red, and her hands trembled as she clutched a small bag. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice breaking. I opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slowly, as if entering sacred ground. I made tea without a word and set the cups before us. Only then did she speak. "I cannot do this anymore," she whispered. I studied her face. "What has happened?" She bit her lip, fighting back tears. "David has become unbearable. Ever since you walked out, he has grown colder. He refuses to talk about you, but I see it. He is haunted by what happened, and instead of facing it, he turns his anger on us, on me, on the children." My chest tightened. "Lisa, what do you mean?" She looked down at her hands, shouting, slamming doors. "The children cry at night. He does not strike them, but the air in that house is poison. I tried to calm him, to reason with him, but he sees me as disloyal. He accuses me of taking your side, of betraying him." Her words twisted like knives, but I did not let my fear show. "Lisa, you and the children deserve better than this. You should not live in fear." She shook her head. "Where would I go? He would never let me leave with them, and I do not have the strength to fight him alone." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Then you are not alone. If you need shelter, my home is open to you, always." Her tears spilled freely then. "Thank you, but if I come here, he will come for me, for us, and I do not know what he would do." Her fear was real. I could see the shadow of David's pride and rage stretching across her like a storm cloud, but I also knew this moment was the breaking point. If Lisa had come to me, it meant the house of cards was collapsing. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My son's words echoed in my mind. "Do not contact us again." Yet his wife had come to me. His children were caught in the middle, and the line he had drawn was blurring. The next day, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from my eldest granddaughter, Emma. Her small voice shook through the line. "Grandma, can I come see you?" My heart skipped. "Of course, sweetheart. What is wrong?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Daddy is angry all the time. Mommy cries a lot. I just want to be with you." Her words shattered what little defense I had left. I knew then that David's pride had not only broken me, it was breaking his family too. That evening, Emma arrived with her little brother, Jack. Lisa had driven them herself. Her face pale with exhaustion, she hugged me tightly at the door. "Please keep them tonight. They need peace." "Just one night," I agreed, and as I tucked them into the guest room bed, their little hands clutching mine, I felt a surge of purpose I had not felt in months. My son might have cast me aside, but my grandchildren still saw me as home. The following morning, chaos erupted. I was preparing breakfast when the sharp sound of pounding rattled my front door. I opened it to find David standing there, his face flushed, his eyes burning with fury. "Where are they?" he barked. "Inside," I answered calmly. He pushed past me, storming into the living room. "Children, get your things. We are leaving now." Emma clutched my arm, tears streaming down her face. Jack hid behind the couch. Lisa stood frozen, her lips trembling. "David," I said firmly, "stop this. The children needed rest. That is all." He turned on me, his fingers stabbing the air. "You defied me. I told you to stay out of our lives, and here you are, poisoning them against me." "I have done nothing but love them," I replied. "If your own children fear you, perhaps you should ask why." His face twisted. For a moment, I feared he might strike me. Instead, he grabbed Lisa's arm. You brought them here. Did you not? You conspired with her against me." Lisa's voice broke. "David, please, they are children. They just needed a safe night." He shoved her back, not hard enough to throw her, but hard enough to send a clear message. My heart pounded with rage. "That is enough," I thundered. "This is my home, and I will not allow you to terrorize anyone under my roof." The children sobbed openly now, clinging to me. Lisa's eyes filled with terror. David's chest heaved with rage, his fists trembling. "You want war, mother," he spat. "You have it." He turned sharply, stormed out, and slammed the door so hard the walls shook. His car engine roared to life, tires screeching as he sped away. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the children's cries. I gathered them close, my arms wrapping around their trembling bodies. Lisa sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I knew, in that moment, there was no going back. David had crossed the line. His pride had consumed him so fully that he was willing to destroy his own family to preserve it. The breaking point had come, but if he thought his rage would silence me, he was wrong. Because I was no longer the mother who cowered under the weight of guilt. I was no longer the woman who measured her worth by her son's approval. I was something far stronger. I was a shield, and I would protect the ones who still believed in love, no matter what war it brought to my doorstep. No matter what war it brought to my doorstep. The morning after David stormed out of my house, I expected the silence to feel heavy. Instead, it was brittle, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Lisa sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, staring into it as if it might tell her what to do. The children remained curled on the couch under a blanket, their faces pale and drawn. I moved quietly, cooking eggs and buttering toast, determined to give them one morning of normalcy. But we all knew peace had become fragile glass, already cracked by noon. The storm broke. It began with the phone. Call after call from David's number flashed across the screen, unanswered. When Lisa finally picked up, his voice was loud enough for me to hear every word from across the room. "You will regret betraying me. You and my mother both. I will make sure you pay for this." Lisa flinched. "David, please stop. The children needed rest. That is all." But he was beyond reason. His words came like thunder, rolling with fury. "You think you can defy me? You think you can run to her and humiliate me? I will take the children. I will take the house. And when I am finished, you will have nothing." Lisa's hand trembled as she lowered the phone, her eyes filled with tears. "He is going to destroy us." I placed my hand over hers. "He cannot take what does not belong to him. And you are not powerless, Lisa. Not anymore." She wanted to believe me. I could see it, but fear had already wrapped its claws around her heart. Later that afternoon, the first blow came. A courier arrived with an envelope. Inside were legal papers. David had filed for full custody of the children. His claim was vicious, accusing Lisa of neglect, accusing me of manipulation. He called us unfit, unstable, dangerous. Lisa crumpled to the floor as she read. How could he do this? How could he twist everything like this? I knelt beside her and lifted her chin. Because he is afraid, and fear makes men do cruel things. But truth has a way of breaking through. We spent the next days in a haze of meetings with attorneys, gathering documents, preparing statements. Lisa told her story, her voice breaking when she spoke of the nights the children cried themselves to sleep. I told mine, my voice steady as I described the electric bill he had once sent me, the moment that cracked the foundation of our family. Our lawyer listened, nodding, promising to fight. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. One night, as I tucked Emma and Jack into bed, Emma looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. Grandma, is Daddy going to take us away? I smoothed her hair back gently. No, sweetheart, nobody is going to take you away. You are safe here. But as I whispered those words, I prayed silently they would be true. The next morning, safety shattered again. I was walking out to collect the mail when I noticed the side of my house, spray painted in large black letters, were the words, thief, manipulator, liar. The paint dripped like blood down the wall. My knees nearly buckled. The neighbors had begun to peek out their windows, whispering behind curtains. Shame tried to claw at me, but rage burned hotter. I knew whose hand was behind this. Inside, Lisa gasped when she saw it. The children clung to her legs, frightened. I called the police, filed a report, and though they promised to investigate, I could see in their eyes that little would come of it. That night, Lisa could not sleep. She paced the floor, whispering to herself. I sat at the table, the weight of years pressing on me. Finally, I stood, opened the old cabinet where I had locked away David's letter, and laid it on the table. Lisa froze. What is that? The truth, I answered. His words, in his hand. He thought they would break me. Instead, they will expose him. She sat down slowly. What do we do with it? I leaned forward, my eyes fierce. We fight back. He has dragged us into war, but he forgets one thing. I raised him. I know every weakness he has, and I will use the truth he tried to bury to defend us. The next days blurred into strategy. Our lawyer advised us to keep everything, texts, emails, notes. Lisa dug out old journals where she had written about nights David came home shouting, about times she felt trapped. I gave over the letter, its words now transformed from wound to weapon. When the custody hearing began, the courtroom filled with tension so thick it was hard to breathe. David entered in his sharp suit, his face hard as stone. He did not glance at me, not even once. Lisa sat beside me, her hands cold in mine. The children were not there, thank God. But their absence hung in the air like a ghost. David's attorney painted him as a dedicated father, a man betrayed by a bitter mother and manipulative wife. His words were polished, but every sentence dripped venom. Then David took the stand. He spoke of his sacrifices, of how he worked long hours, of how Lisa failed him, how I poisoned the children against him. His voice cracked in carefully rehearsed moments, designed to stir pity. But then it was our turn. Lisa spoke first. Her voice shook, but her truth was undeniable. She spoke of the shouting, the threats, the fear in the children's eyes. She described the night she brought them to me, her desperation, her exhaustion. Tears streamed down her face, and the courtroom grew still. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, the weight of my years and my pain heavy on my shoulders, but my voice was clear. I told the story from the beginning, the years I gave, the nights I spent babysitting, the joy I felt with my grandchildren. Then I told them of the bill, the absurd, cruel bill for electricity, and finally, I held up the letter. This, I said, my hand steady, is who he has become. These are his words, written in anger, but never taken back. He severed our bond with this page, and now he seeks to sever his children from their mother with lies. But truth does not die, even when buried in ink. The judge read the letter silently. The courtroom waited. I watched David's face pale as the words came back to haunt him. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. The hearing ended, but the war did not. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, cameras flashing. David strode past them without a word, but Lisa and I were stopped. She clutched my arm, trembling, but I raised my chin. Family is not a weapon, I said firmly to the cameras. It is meant to be shelter. When pride turns it into a battlefield, everyone bleeds. I will not let that happen to my grandchildren. The word spread faster than I imagined. By the time we reached home, neighbors who had whispered now sent messages of support. Friends brought meals, offered prayers. Strangers sent letters. sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. But David was not finished. That night, as rain lashed against the windows, I received another message. A single piece of paper slipped under my door. On it were the words, "This is not over." I stood in the hallway, the storm raging outside, the children asleep upstairs, Lisa sitting with her head in her hands. My hand tightened on the paper. He was right. It was not over, but neither was I. Because now I understood something I had not before. David believed this war was about control, but for me, it was about protection. Protection of the innocent, protection of love, and a mother, a grandmother fighting to protect her family, is stronger than any storm. Asterisk. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside my life only gathered force. David's message, slipped under my door with the words, "This is not over," lingered in my mind like a curse. It was not just a threat, it was a promise, and I knew my son well enough to understand he would keep it. Days turned into weeks. The custody case remained unresolved, hanging like a blade over our heads. Lisa moved between fear and resolve, her strength flickering but never fully extinguished. The children stayed with me often, their laughter returning in small doses, though always shadowed by questions they dared not ask. Then, on a Wednesday morning thick with fog, the real strike came. I was in the kitchen, stirring oatmeal, when there was a knock at the door. Not the frantic pounding of David, but a measured, heavy knock that made my chest tighten. When I opened the door, 2 men in suits stood there, badges clipped to their belts. "Ma'am, we are here with a warrant," one said, his tone flat. My throat tightened. A warrant for what? He unfolded a sheet of paper. Financial fraud and coercion. Behind him, a police officer appeared, already reaching for his cuffs. Lisa, who had been coming down the hallway, gasped loudly. "This is a mistake," I said firmly. "I have done no such thing." But the men moved forward. "You will have to come with us, ma'am." The officer stepped closer, his hand brushing the cuffs. For one horrifying second, I thought I would be dragged out of my own home, in front of my grandchildren. "Wait," Lisa cried, running to the table. She grabbed the folder we had prepared for our attorney, thick with letters, receipts, and the bill David had sent me. She shoved it at the officer. "This is what you should be looking at, not her." The officer hesitated, looking at the papers. The men in suits frowned but allowed him to flip through. He found the electric bill, the letter David had written, the notes of threats Lisa had documented. The tension in the room shifted. "Who filed this claim?" Lisa demanded. The lead agent answered reluctantly. "David Reynolds." The name hung heavy in the air. I felt something break inside me. My son had not only sought to destroy my dignity, not only dragged us into court, but now he had tried to paint me as a criminal. He wanted to see me in handcuffs, branded as guilty, humiliated in front of the world. The agents exchanged words quietly and finally said, "We will review this evidence with the prosecutor. For now, we will not be making an arrest." The prosecutor. "For now, we will not be making an arrest." Relief washed over Lisa, but my body remained rigid. I stood frozen as they left, the door closing with a final thud. Lisa sank into a chair, shaking. "He will not stop. He will not stop until he ruins you." "No," I whispered, my voice hard as steel. "He will not stop until I stop him." That night, I made my decision. For months, I had held back, still clinging to the fragile hope that David would come to his senses, that some sliver of the boy I had raised would reappear. But the boy was gone. Pride had devoured him, malice had taken root, and now he was willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way, even his mother, even his children. I gathered everything, every receipt, every letter, every message. Lisa brought forward her journals, her texts, her photos. Together we built a fortress of truth, brick by brick. And then I went further. I called in every favor I had, old friends from church, from the community center, even neighbors who had once doubted me. I asked them to speak, to tell what they had seen, what they had heard, to shine light into the darkness David had tried to weave around us. The response was overwhelming. People came forward with stories of Lisa rushing out of the house in tears, of children playing in my yard to escape their fathers shouting, of nights when the lights in their home burned until dawn because no one could sleep. It was not just my fight anymore. It had become a reckoning. The next court date arrived. The air inside the courthouse crackled with tension. David entered, his face calm but his eyes cold, flanked by his attorney. Lisa and I sat together, surrounded by a quiet army of witnesses. The judge began, and the battle unfolded. David's attorney spoke of loyalty, of tradition, of a mother who could not let go and a wife who sought to manipulate. Their words were sharp, but they no longer cut. Then came our turn. Lisa spoke with fire this time, no longer trembling. She laid bare the fear she had lived in, the weight she had carried. Her words rang with truth. I followed, standing tall, my voice steady. This is not about revenge. It is about protection. A home should not be a battlefield. Children should not live in fear, and a son should not wield his mother's love as a weapon. Then the witnesses came forward, one after another. Each voice added another crack to David's facade. By the time the neighbor described seeing Lisa in tears on her porch late at night, David's composure had begun to slip. But the final blow came when our attorney presented the warrant that had been issued against me and the evidence that disproved it. The judge's eyes hardened as he read, and finally, he turned to David. Did you knowingly file false accusations against your mother? David shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. His attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of his hand. Answer the question. The courtroom held its breath. For a moment, David's mask slipped. His eyes darted, his lips tightened. And then he spoke through clenched teeth. She deserved it. Gasps echoed through the room. The judge's gavel struck sharply. That will be all. I have heard enough. The proceedings ended not with triumph, but with silence. The silence of a man exposed, of a family laid bare, of truth finally forcing its way into the open. We walked out of that courthouse into the cool air. The crowd of reporters waiting again. Lisa shielded the children, but I stopped. I looked directly at the cameras, my voice strong. My son tried to break me. He tried to break his wife. He tried to break his children. But love cannot be broken, and truth cannot be erased. If there is one lesson in this, it is that silence protects no one. Speak, even if your voice shakes, because silence is the ally of cruelty. The words spread like wildfire. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. Some had been silenced by husbands, some by children, some by fear. They wrote to say they finally felt seen. That night, back at home, Lisa hugged me tightly. You saved us, she whispered. I shook my head. No, we saved each other. But even as peace settled over the house, I knew the war was not entirely won. David had been exposed, but his pride still smoldered, and pride, when cornered, can lash out with dangerous force. I stood at the window long after everyone had gone to bed, the night quiet around me. For the first time, I felt the faint stirrings of peace, but also the deep certainty that the final confrontation had yet to come. The final week before I confronted Daniel and Lisa felt like I was preparing for battle. I had already reached out to my lawyer, gathered my paperwork, and spoken to a financial advisor about how to protect what little I still owned. But beyond the legal armor, I was building something even more important. The strength to stand in front of my son and tell him that his cruelty had consequences. On Friday evening, I invited them over for dinner. I cooked their favorite dishes, not out of nostalgia but because I wanted no excuse for them to walk away claiming they were mistreated. The house smelled of roasted chicken, garlic bread, and fresh apple pie. It looked warm, inviting, and exactly as it had during happier days. But this time, the warmth wasn't for them. It was my stage, my battleground, and every detail was deliberate. When the doorbell rang, I opened it with a calmness I didn't recognize in myself. Daniel walked in, his shoulders heavy, his expression unreadable. Lisa followed closely, her heels clicking against the floor as though announcing her arrival with authority. The children trailed behind, distracted by their tablets. Smells good, Mom, Daniel said, trying to sound casual. I smiled politely and ushered them to the dining table. Dinner began quietly, almost too quietly. Every bite was chewed with tension. No one dared to break the silence. Finally, Lisa cleared her throat. So, about that bill, we haven't heard back from you. Daniel and I are just trying to be fair. You did use a lot of electricity while watching the kids. Her words were laced with condescension, as though she believed this conversation was beneath her. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't stop her. I placed my fork down, folded my hands, and looked directly at them. Lisa, I have thought about that bill every single day since you sent it. And you're right, I used electricity. I washed dishes. I cooked meals. I kept this home running while your children laughed and played under my roof. But I paid a price much higher than electricity. I paid with my time, my energy, and my love. Things you cannot put a number on. Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. No, Daniel, tonight, I speak, and you will listen. You sent me a bill for the electricity, But do you know what I should have billed you for? The countless nights I stayed up because one of the kids had nightmares, the hours I spent helping with homework, the years I gave up working extra jobs so I could be available for you. If we are talking about numbers, then your bill doesn't even scratch the surface of what you owe me. Lisa's lips tightened. She was about to interrupt, but I leaned in. My voice was calm, steady, unshaken. I'm not angry because of the bill itself. I'm angry because that bill showed me the truth. You don't see me as family. You see me as a resource to be used and discarded. And Daniel, you allowed it. You stood by silently while your wife reduced your own mother to an expense on a spreadsheet. Daniel lowered his gaze, shame flickering across his face. But Lisa crossed her arms, defiant. You're being dramatic. It was just about fairness. Fairness, I repeated, letting the word cut through the room. Then, let us be fair. I raised you, Daniel, without sending you a single invoice. I sacrificed vacations, clothes, and sleep to ensure you had a good life. If we are being fair, I should have handed you decades worth of bills the day you turned 18. But I didn't, because that's not how love works. Love gives freely. Love sacrifices. And now, you've taken that love and twisted it into a transaction. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down. He rubbed his temples, his voice strained. Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Lisa thought. I cut him off. Stop hiding behind her. You're a grown man, Daniel. You made a choice, and because of that choice, I am making mine. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. I slid it across the table toward him. His hand trembled as he opened it, revealing the official documents inside. What's this? He asked. My will, I replied. I've changed it. Every asset, every savings, every bit of security I worked for is no longer in your name. You will not inherit this house, this land, or any of the money. It will go to charities, to causes that actually value sacrifice and love, and to my grandchildren, when they are old enough to understand what family really means. Lisa's face drained of color. You can't do that, she snapped. I already did, I said calmly. You wanted to reduce me to numbers. So, let's talk in numbers. The house is worth $250,000. The savings account has $70,000. That's over $300,000 that will never pass into your hands. Consider that my response to your electricity bill. Consider that my response to your electricity bill. Daniel looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing without words. His children, sensing the tension, looked up for the first time. Confusion clouded their young faces. Lisa slammed her hands on the table. You're punishing us for nothing. For a simple bill. I stood, my chair scraping against the floor. No, Lisa. I'm punishing you for stripping away the meaning of family, for teaching my grandchildren that love comes with a receipt, and for convincing my son to stand against the very woman who gave him life. Tears burned my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. I had cried enough already. Tonight was not about tears. Tonight was about clarity. Daniel finally found his voice. Mom, please, don't do this. I'll fix it. I'll make it right. I shook my head. Daniel, the time to make it right was when you saw that bill and realized how wrong it was. Instead, you stayed silent. Silence is a choice, too. And now, I must choose silence from you. I walked away from the table, leaving the documents where they lay. My hands trembled, but my heart felt lighter than it had in months. For once, I wasn't begging for their respect. I was demanding it through action. As I reached the door, Daniel called out, his voice breaking. Mom, don't shut us out, please. I paused, turned, and looked at him one final time. You shut me out the day you reduced me to an expense. Tonight, I'm reclaiming my worth. Then, I left the room. The days that followed were quieter, lonelier, but filled with an unexpected peace. I no longer sat by the phone waiting for Daniel to call. I no longer felt like I was walking on eggshells, trying to earn scraps of affection. Instead, I began rebuilding my life. I joined a community group at church, started volunteering at the library, and made friends who saw me not as a burden but as someone with value. I even began writing in a journal, recording every lesson I had learned from this painful journey. My story became a source of strength for others in the group, many of whom had faced similar betrayals. We cried together, we laughed together, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel alone. As for Daniel, weeks turned into months with little contact. Occasionally, he would send short, guilty messages. The kids miss you. Lisa says hi. Can we come over? I didn't ignore them entirely, but I kept my responses short, guarded. I knew rebuilding trust would take more than words. One afternoon, I received a drawing in the mail from my granddaughter. It showed the two of us sitting together under a tree, smiling. At the bottom, in her wobbly handwriting, she had written, "I love you, Grandma." That paper meant more to me than any inheritance or apology ever could, because in her innocent heart, she still understood the truth. Love is not a transaction. Love is freely given. I framed that drawing and hung it in my living room. Every time I looked at it, I reminded myself that no matter how much pain Daniel and Lisa had caused, I still had the power to protect the purity of love for the next generation. And that was the true reckoning. Not revenge, not bitterness, but reclaiming the dignity and love I had given all my life, and finally choosing to give it to myself.